Let's create a simple to-do list using Express.js and EJS. So I have here a new empty folder. Let's start by initializing it as an npm project. I'll do that using npm init-y. And we now have our package.json file. Let's open it. And I'm going to change its type from common.js to module. Another thing I'll do here is my scripts. I'm going to get rid of the test and I will replace it with a start script. And what I'm going to do here is node, followed by the name of my main node file, my main JavaScript file. I'm going to call this file app.js. We will create it in a second. And also I'm going to add here the watch flag, so --watch. And this way Node will detect changes and restart our server whenever needed. Next up, we need to install Express and EJS. So npm install Express, EJS. And let's install them. Great, and we can now see in the dependency section both of them, so we have here EJS and Express. Let's go ahead and create our main file, which is going to be app.js. So let's start by importing Express, and now I can create my Express object, and this object represents the actual Express server. Everything will be based around this object. Next, let's define the port to which our server will listen. And let's ask our server to actually start listening to this port, which can be done with app.listen. So that's basically the skeleton of our Express application. Once we run it, it should start listening to our port. Next, we should probably create our first route, and this is going to be the root route. And to keep things simple, this route will handle GET requests. So app.get, and as I said, the address or the URL is going to be the root of the website, so /. And the callback attached to this route has to have the request and response parameters. And let's start simple, so I'm simply going to send tasks. Only a string, later on it will be the actual list of our to-do list. So response.send tasks. Let's now start our server. I'll do that using my npm script, so npm start. And our server started and is now listening to port 5000. I should be able to follow the link, so let's click here. Now, I don't only want this text. I don't only want this string. I want an actual HTML page here. And this is where EJS will come into play. So first, we should probably create our views folder. And as you might know, views is the folder that we usually use to store our EJS files. So let's create our views folder. So make directory views. And I'm only going to have one file in this folder, and I'll simply call it views.ejs. So in the views folder, I want a file called tasks.ejs. Now, this is going to be based on an HTML file, so we can ask Visual Studio Code to give us the general template of an HTML file, which can be done with an exclamation mark. And if I choose it, I already have the basic HTML template. Let's say that the title is going to be tasks, and let's also add here a heading 1 saying tasks. Let's now go back to app.ejs, and we need to let Express know that we are using EJS as our view engine or HTML templating engine. This can be done using the set command. So here I'm going to add app.set, and what we want to set is the view engine. So this is what I'm going to write here, and our view engine is going to be EJS. So I'm going to write here EJS. And I also want Express to know that my views folder is called views, right? We have here this folder. This is what EJS is going to use. So here I need to set my views folder to views. And now in my actual route, instead of just sending the string, the text, tasks, I want to use my EJS file. So instead of send, I'm going to use render. And as a parameter to render, we need to pass the name of the EJS file that we want to use. In my case, this is going to be tasks.ejs, but I don't have to write the extension, so it's simply going to look like tasks. And let's restart our server, and let's refresh our page, and we can see the actual HTML page that is based on our EJS file. Next, let's try to send our view an actual array containing actual tasks. So here, let's define a new array. And this is going to be the tasks array. And it's going to be an array of objects. So each such object is going to represent one task. And each task is going to have an ID, a title, and a status, which can be either completed or incomplete. So let's create here the object for the first task. And let's follow the same pattern to create the second task. So once again, it has an ID, a title, and a status, which is completed. And let's also add a third one. And now that I have my array of tasks, I want to send it to my EJS file. Now, what we send to the EJS file has to be an object. And since this is an object, it has to be in the form of pairs of key and value. So let's say that the key is tasks, and the value is going to be this array, the array we just defined, which is also called tasks. But in modern JavaScript, if the key and the value are identical, are exactly the same, we don't have to write it twice. We don't have to write the same word for both the key and the value. We can just write it once, like so. And JavaScript will understand that this is going to be used for both the key and the value. So we have a key called tasks, and the value is also tasks, which in our case is this array. Now we're going to have access to this array in our EJS file. So let's get back to the EJS file. And here I want to start by making sure that I have the EJS parameter called tasks. This can be done, and of course I have to put it in the EJS tags. So this can be done with an if statement. And to make sure that I have the EJS parameter called tasks, I'm simply going to write here if tasks. And everything that's related to the rendering that is based on tasks is going to come here after this if statement. And this way I am making sure that I am relying on something that actually exists. After my if statement, I need to have curly braces, and then in a different line, I have to close the curly braces. And everything else is going to come here, in between this and this line. Now, we should probably take into account the case in which our array is empty, right? It exists. We have the tasks parameter, but the list that we got, the array that we received, is empty. So I'm going to add here another if statement, and this one is going to check if the tasks array is empty, or in other words, if its length is 0. And notice that I had to have here another curly braces, another opening curly braces, and this is why, once again, I have to close them. So I'll have another of these to close the curly braces. And if the length of our array is indeed 0, which means that the array is empty, all I want to write here is that the tasks array is empty. This can be done by normal HTML code, so it's simply going to be a paragraph letting us know that there are no tasks yet. If this is not the case, we know that first we have the tasks EJS parameter, and on top of that we know that the array is not empty, so we actually have tasks that need to be displayed here. This is why here I'm going to add else. And notice that I had to close the curly braces and open new ones. And here, in between, I can handle the case in which I actually have tasks that need to be displayed. So I can, for example, create here another paragraph. And if I want, for example, only show here the number of tasks that need to be displayed, I can use the EJS tags once more. But this time, because I want to actually show something in my HTML, to render something to my HTML page, I'm going to add here the equals sign. And as I said, what I want to start with is showing the length of the array. So tasks.length. And if we refresh our page, we can see here 3, because here we define 3 tasks in the tasks array. But what if we actually want to go over the list of tasks and actually display each and every one of them? To do that, we can use a for loop. EJS fully supports for loops, and we are going to use one now. So instead of this, that only show the number of tasks, we're going to have here a for loop. And this is going to take the form of a for of loop. For of loops are designed to go over some iterable item. And an array is a great example for that. Something that we can iterate over, go over its elements one by one. So for task of tasks. Tasks is the array of tasks, all of the tasks that we have to go over, whereas task is nothing but a name that I defined here. This is a variable representing the current task that we're going over. So eventually we will go over all of them, and in each of the iterations of this loop, task is going to receive the value of a different task, of a different element of the array. And once again, notice that here I had to open curly braces, which means that once again I'm going to have to close them. So let's add another of these. And now I could, for example, add a paragraph, and I want this paragraph to contain the title of the current task. So once again, if I want to render something to my HTML page, on top of the normal EJS tags, I also have to add the equals sign. And here I want to show my task.title. If I refresh my page now, we can see the titles of our 3 tasks. Now, I probably want my page to be a bit more interactive than that. So let's start by adding to the left of each of the tasks a checkbox that can be either checked or unchecked. So to do that, I'm going to add here an input, and the type of this input is going to be checkbox. And if I refresh my page now, I can see my checkboxes, but as you can see, we got a line break in between the checkbox and the title of the task. Ideally, I would like the checkbox to be to the left of the title and not in a separate line. So what I'm going to do here is replace my paragraph element with a label element, and this one is not going to cause the line break. So now we don't have the line breaks, but now we got everything in one line. So let's add a div element wrapping each of the tasks. So here I'm going to add div, and let's move the closing tag here. And now each of the tasks is going to be on its own line. Much better this way. Now, what I would like these checkboxes to do is to actually send a post request to the server. So I don't only want this to be a checkbox that's here but doesn't do anything. I want that on every click, on every ticking or unticking of this box, an HTTP request will be sent over to the server so that the status of the task can be updated on the server side. To do that, I'm going to put these two inside a form, and the form is going to help me send these HTTP requests. So the form is going to be here, and let's close it after these two elements. Now, we need to specify where we want our HTTP request to be sent to. I want it to be sent to tasks. It makes a lot of sense because tasks is the endpoint that is in charge of this resource, of the tasks resource. So here it's going to be tasks. We didn't implement it in our server yet, but we will do it in a minute. The thing is that tasks on its own is probably not going to be enough. And this is because we have to know exactly which of the tasks we are talking about. We can either talk about the first one or the second one or the third one, and we have to be very specific about that. And one way that's very useful to identify one specific resource out of a list of many similar resources is using a path parameter. A path parameter is something that we add to the URL of the request. So here I'm going to have another /, and this is going to be followed by the ID of the task that I am talking about. So if I add here the ID of the task, I know exactly which of the tasks I am talking about. And once again, to add here the ID of the task, I'm going to add here the EJS tags. And because I want this to be part of the HTML, I want it to be rendered to the HTML itself, I once again have to use the equals sign. And what I want to have here is the ID of the current task. The current task is simply task, this variable, so task.id. As for the method that we're going to send, we are sending this request directly from the HTML form, so we can only choose either get or post. We don't have access to any other HTTP request, but this is completely fine. This is a widely used approach, and I am going to go with a post request because we want to update an existing task. If all we wanted to do is get the data of an existing task, I would probably go with get, but since we are updating an existing one, post is probably the better choice. Now, if we refresh our page, it doesn't seem to have made any difference. But if we look at the page source, so right-click, view page source, we can see that we now have 3 different forms, and you can see that the action for each of them is different. So here we have tasks /1, but here we have tasks /2, and here tasks /3. Now, I want to link my checkbox and my label, the label that is describing this checkbox. Because, for example, feed the dog is the label describing this first checkbox. But right now, the way that it's implemented right now, I can click here on the text and it doesn't do anything. I have to click on the actual box for it to change its state. But what we can do is add an ID to the input, and this ID is going to be completed. And for the label, I'm going to add the for attribute. And for is used to link a label to an actual element, for example, an input element. So since I want to link this label to this input, and this input has the ID completed, this is also what I'm going to write here as the value of the for attribute. So completed. And this way I am linking my label to this input. So let's refresh our page. And once again, let's try clicking on the text. And we can see that it's working. I can once again click on the text and it is unchecked. The problem is that if I now try to check one of the other tasks, for example, the third one, it's still going to check and uncheck the first one. So what's the problem here? The problem is that we have more than one HTML element sharing the same ID. So once again, let's take a look at the page source. So view page source. And you can see that we have this input here, whose ID is completed. But then we also have this input, and its ID is once again completed, so the same ID. And also the third one, another input whose ID is the same thing. And this is something we should avoid, and as you just saw, it can even cause like real bugs, real problems. So what I am going to do here is make sure that I have a different ID for each of the inputs. And to do that, I'm simply going to concatenate with the word completed the ID of the task. So here, let me copy this and paste it here, right after the word completed. Maybe we can separate them with a dash, and then let's add the ID of the current task. And of course, the for of the label has to be updated accordingly. So let's try to refresh our page and look at the page source again. And now we can see that the ID of this input is completed -1, but the ID of this input is completed -2. And if I go back to the page itself, I can click here to check the first box, or I could click here to check this box. Now, what about the initial value of the checkboxes? Because right now, if I refresh my page, we can see that none of them is checked. even though one of the tasks should be, because the second one should start as completed. So I would expect to have this one checked, the second one checked. So if I want a checkbox to be checked, I can add here the checked attribute. And if I refresh my page now, I can see that all of them are checked because all of them have this attribute. But I want to add the checked attribute selectively. So here is how we're going to do that. Instead of just adding the checked attribute, we are going to use an EJS ternary operator. So let me remove it for a minute and let's add the EJS tags. And once again, because this is something that we want to render into the final HTML, I have to add the equals sign. And the condition for the ternary operation is going to be the completed field of the task, because each of the tasks have the completed field. This is what we're going to base our decision on. So task.completed, but this is nothing more than the condition for the ternary operation. So here I need to have my question mark, and if the task is completed, that's when I want my checked attribute. Otherwise, I don't want this attribute, so I'm just going to go with an empty string. And if we refresh our page now, we can see that only the second task is marked as completed. And maybe I can move this here. Now, in a lot of forms, we have a submit button, but in this case, I don't want to have this button. I want my HTTP request to be sent as soon as I check or uncheck the box. I want it to be immediate. I don't want the user to have to, check or uncheck whatever they want and then have to click on an additional button. I would like to avoid this extra step. So what I am going to do is add here a request to send or to submit the form, to submit this form as soon as the state of our checkbox changes. So to do that, I need to attach a callback to the onChange event of this checkbox. So to do that, here I need to add something to onChange, and here I need to write my callback. I need to write what I want to happen as soon as the state of the checkbox changes. And what I want to happen is the form to be submitted, and this can be done using this.form.submit. And now, as soon as a change to the state of this checkbox will be detected, the form itself, the form containing the checkbox, will be submitted. The only thing that we're missing here in the checkbox is the name field. And the name field is necessary for the server to retrieve the value of this input. Because after the user checks or unchecks one of the checkboxes and the form is submitted, they should be able to retrieve the new state of the checkbox. So to be able to retrieve the new state of this input, it has to have the name attribute. So let's add here the name attribute. And this is going to be used at the server side to know if the task is either completed or not. And this is why the name is going to be completed. Let's now go back to our server. And there I should have this route, tasks followed by the path parameter indicating the ID of the task that needs to be updated. So here in app.js, let's add the new route. And of course, this has to be a post route, so app.post. And the reason it has to be a post route is because here we define the method to be post. So the server should expect post requests. Now, where do these requests are expected to be targeted at? At tasks, of course. So tasks. And once again, the reason is that here we send them to tasks. And this has to be followed by the path parameter. So here after tasks, I'm going to define my path parameter and I'm going to call it ID. And just like any other route, the callback is going to have the request and response parameters. And I'm going to start by retrieving the ID from the request's URL. So to do that, I had to access the request itself, the object of the request, and there is a property called params. This is what allows me to access the path parameters. Then it has to be followed by the name of the actual path parameter. In my case, I called it ID, so this is what I had to access. Another thing I want you to notice is that the path parameter is retrieved as a string. But since my tasks have IDs, which are actual numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, these are actual numbers. I had to convert the string from the path parameter to a number, and I did that using parseInt. Next, I want to find which of the tasks is the one to be updated. So it shouldn't be too hard because we already have the ID of the task that we want to update, but I want to find the ID within my array. You could say, of course, that you could just subtract 1 from the ID, and this way you could find the index in the array. But in a more general perspective, this wouldn't be right, this wouldn't be correct, because it's not always going to follow this pattern. The IDs can be random numbers and might have nothing to do with the index of the array in which they are stored. This is why I'm going to use find, and this will allow me to use the ID of the task to find its index within the array. So let's define here the task index, the name of the array that we want to go over. In my case, it's tasks. And by the way, it's not going to work this way because right now tasks is a local parameter of this callback. Let me move it so it's a global variable. So I'll just move it here. And now I am going to be able to access it from both this request and also this request. Now, since I want to find the index of the task within my array, I'm going to use here find index. And what I need to pass as a parameter to find index is a callback. This callback expects one parameter, which is the current element of the array that we are currently going over. And since this is an array of tasks, let's call the variable representing the current element task. Now, what is my indication that the current task is the one that I'm looking for? If its ID, which can be accessed by task.id, is equal to what I got in my path parameter, which I already store in task ID. So let's check the equality between this task.id to task ID, which is once again what I got in the path parameter. If they are equal, it means that I found the element, I found the task that I am looking for, and this is what I'm going to assign to task index. Now, if we went over the entire array and couldn't find any task whose ID is task ID, or our path parameter, it means that the request was no good because it's trying to update a non-existing task. Our indication for this case is if task ID is -1, because this is what find index is going to return in case no element could be found. So if task index is indeed -1, I'm going to return a response to the client with a status code 404. 404 is the indication for resource not found, or the resource that we are trying to access to update couldn't be found. So it's going to be response.status 404. And for the actual response, what I'm going to send back over, I'm just going to send task not found. And let me also add here return, just to make sure that nothing of what I'm going to write next doesn't happen. Now it's time to retrieve the information for the updated request, because we should probably know if the task should now be completed or incomplete. This information could be found in the body of the request. But since we are sending the requests from an HTML form, we have to add here another middleware. And this middleware is what's going to allow us parse the information that is sent within the HTML form. Luckily, that's something that's baked into Express. So I'm simply going to use express.url encoded. And notice that I had to pass an extra parameter, this object, to URL encoded, and it's called extended true. This is always going to be this way. Now that we have this middleware, we should be able to access the data that's sent from the HTML form. So here, let's try to simply log this information. And to access this information, I'm going to write here request.body. And I should probably send back some kind of response from my server, otherwise the client will just hang there, waiting for a response that's never coming. So to keep things simple and easy, instead of generating a new response here, I'm going to use a redirect. So response.redirect, and I'm going to rely on something that I already did, which is this route. So I'm going to redirect the request to the root route, and this is simply because I already have it here. And let's try to submit one of these forms. And just to remember, we have 3 of them, right? Because if I look at the page source, I have the first form, the second form, and also the third one. And to submit any of them, I should just check or uncheck the corresponding checkbox. So let's try to submit the first one. And we can see what we got from the body of this request. And what we got is a field called completed, whose value is on. So why is this what we got? Let's get back to our EJS file. And here, this checkbox started as unchecked. There was no check mark in it. Now, after we checked the box, it changed its state to checked. Now, checkboxes in HTML behave a bit differently. They are not really normal Boolean variables that can be either true or false. They can be basically either sent over or not sent over. The current state of this checkbox is true, so this is why it was sent, and its value is on. And the reason that the key is completed is because this is what we specified here. The name is completed. Let's stop this page and refresh it. And let's now try to do the same thing with the second checkbox. This checkbox started as checked. So when I click on it, it will change its state to unchecked. And this is why here in the log, it's going to look like this. So once again, we got the body of the request, but this time it is empty. And this is once again because of the behavior of HTML checkboxes. It did send the form because it had the onChange event. But since the checkbox itself does not have the checked attribute, it's not even part of the information that's sent in the body of the request. Great, so we see that we can see the current completion status of the task that we changed. So let's stop this page. And now we're going to rely on this knowledge. We're going to rely on this field, on this property that might be in the body. So if the body contains this property, if the body contains this field, called completed and its value is on, it means that we need to change the state of this task to completed. So here, for example, for task 1, we're going to change its completed state from false to true. So we can use this structuring to extract the value of completed from the body of the request. And if I want to use this structuring, it's going to look like this. So const, and then the name of the property that I am extracting from the body, completed in my case. And this is going to be equal to the body of the request. And now I'm going to have a constant called completed, and it's going to contain the value of the completed property from the body. And now let's try to log this. And if I check the first box, I see on. But if I check the second box, I see undefined. And once again, this is because this body did not contain completed. Now, the thing is that I'm not doing anything with this completed. Let's update the state of the task that we found so that we can see here the updated completion status of the task. So from within our array, from our tasks array, I want to access the task on the index that we found. So this is the task index. And for this task, I want to access its completed property because we know that each of our tasks has this property, has the completed property. So let's change the value of the completed. And what is going to be its updated value? So if completed is on, as for example we can see here, we want the value of completed to be true. Otherwise we simply want it to be false. And this expression can actually be simplified because what we get here is already a Boolean value, so we can actually remove this. And now the completed state of the task is going to be true if and only if we got on for the completed value. Now if, for example, I'm checking this box, the first one, I can see that it stays on, and this is because we actually changed the value in this array. I can now uncheck it, and the check mark actually disappears. The thing is that currently we are working in memory, and what it means that if I restart my server, so let's try that. Let's restart the server, so I'll stop it and restart it. The values of the array were now restarted, so once again it's going to have the original values, and if I refresh my page, I see that I get back to these values, to the initial values. This is why working from memory is good for testing, for the initial setup, but usually it's not what we really want to do long term. Ideally, we should use a database. But here I want to keep things simple, so we are going to use a JSON file. So I'm going to have here a new JSON file. I'm going to call this file tasks.json, and this is going to represent my file database. So here, when I'm starting my server, I'm going to check if this file already exists. So maybe we should import the fs module so we can work with the files. And now I can check if I already have the tasks.json file. So if fs.exists sync tasks.json, or actually what I can do is check if it does not exist. So if not exists, and if the file doesn't exist, let's create it. So to create the file, I'm going to use write file sync. And as I said, I want this file to be called tasks.json. And for now, I want to initialize it with an empty array. So it's going to contain the tasks array, but it's going to start as an empty array. So the content of the file is going to be simply an empty array. This is valid JSON that represents an empty array. And notice that this line will only run if I don't have the file yet. So if later on, after this file already exists, I'll stop my server and restart it, this line will not run. I will not override the existing file with the empty array because it already exists. But in case I don't have it yet, I'm going to initialize it. I'm going to create the file and initialize it with the empty array. And now I'm not going to rely on this hard-coded array anymore. Whenever I need to access the array of tasks, I'm going to read it from my file. So let's delete this array. And now here, in this route, where I want to show my current tasks, I'm going to start by reading the content of the file that I currently have. So to read the file, I'm going to use fs.readFileSync. And as a parameter, I need to pass the path to this file. So this file is simply tasks.json. This is what I'm going to write here. And as an additional parameter, I'm going to specify the encoding, which is going to be UTF-8. Now, what I'm going to have in this file is simply JSON. And I don't want the JSON itself. I want the array that's represented by this JSON. So we're going to parse the JSON that we just read from the file. And to do that, we can use JSON.parse. So we're reading the file, then parsing the JSON we just read from the file. And the parsed JSON, which is actually the array, this is going to be our tasks array. So if I refresh my page now, I can see that I'm starting with an empty array. And it says no tasks yet because here in our EJS file, we have a check. And in this case, we are displaying this paragraph, no tasks yet. Now I want us to be able to add new tasks. So from here, from the HTML page, which we are building in the EJS file, I want to add a new form. So let's start by adding here a subtitle, and I'll use heading 3 for that. And let's refresh the page, and we can see it here. We're going to build the new form here. So let's create here the new form. Now, the action attributes determines the URL, where we're going to send the submitted form. So in my case, I once again want to send it to tasks. This is the URL that needs to take care of tasks, either for showing them or for adding new ones. So the action attribute is going to be tasks. And notice that now I do not need the path parameter. Here, when I wanted to update an existing task, I had to specify which one. What is the specific task that I want to update? But here I want to add a new one, so I don't need to specify an existing one. The next thing we need to provide for the new form is the method. And as you might remember, since we are sending this request from the HTML form, we can only choose between get and post requests. I am going to go with post. Get requests are usually only used to retrieve an existing resource, something that already exists on the server and we want to retrieve it. But since we are now creating a new resource, a new task, we should probably go with a post request. Next, within my form, I want an input field, and this is going to be a text input. This is where the user is going to be able to provide the title for the new task. If we want to be able to access this information, the information from this field, in the server side, it should have a name. So we need to set here the name attribute. And since this is going to represent the title of the new task, I'm going to give it the name title. So let's refresh our page, and we can see here the input of the new form. The thing is that currently it's not really clear what this input is related to. What am I as the user supposed to do with this input? So just above this input, I'm going to add here a label, and this is going to make things a bit clearer for the user. So as you can see, I need to provide here the for attribute, and since this label is supposed to be linked to this input, I need to give an ID to the input and use this ID for the for attribute of the label. So for the ID of the input, I'm going to use title, and then I'm going to use the same ID for the for attribute of the label. And we need to write something in the label itself. This is what's going to be shown to the user so they know what they're supposed to do in this input. I'm just going to write here new task. So let's refresh the page, and we can see new task, and maybe we should add a line break here. And now we have the line break. And the next thing I want to add to my form is the submission button. So let's add here another line break, and to create the submit button, I'm going to use input, where the type of the input is submit, and I don't need these two. And if I refresh my page now, I can see that I have the submit button. And if we want to change the text that appears on this button, we can set the value attribute for this input field. I'm going to write here add task. Now, if I want to make sure that the user provides here something, that they don't leave this text field empty and submitting the form, I can add here required. And now if the user tries to submit the form without writing here anything, they are going to get this warning, please fill in this field. And maybe we can add here another horizontal line. So now we have this form from our HTML page, and using this form we can send post HTTP requests to the server, and these requests will contain the title of the new task that we want to create. Now we need to take care of these requests on the server side. So let's get back to the server code, and here we need to add another route. Once again, this is going to be a post route, and the reason that I have to separate it to a different route is because this time we're not going to have the path parameter. The route that we defined here is only going to take care of requests that contain the path parameter. But the requests that are going to be sent from the new form, they are sent here to tasks. They do not have the path parameter. So this is why here I'm going to create my new post route. And once again, the callback is going to have the request and response parameters. And maybe it makes more sense to move this route that takes care of additions of new tasks to the server before updating existing ones. So let me move this one here. And just like here, we used this structuring to extract the completed field from the request's body, I'm going to do something very similar in this new route, but this time I don't expect something called completed, but I do expect something called title. And the reason I know that is because the name of this input field is title. So the body of requests that originate from this form is supposed to contain title. So here, instead of completed, it's going to be title. And now we want to add the new task to the array that we currently have. We need to look at our JSON file. We have it here. This is the file that we created when our server loaded. And as you might remember, because this file didn't exist yet, it was initialized as an empty array. So here, we can see that this file was created. It was indeed initialized as an empty array. And maybe I can put them side by side. So currently the array is empty, but later on it might have some tasks. So in order to create the new task and add it to our array, I'm first going to read what we currently have. So first we're going to read the content of the file, of this file, of the JSON file. Then we're going to parse it. So we can convert the JSON that we have here to an actual array. So this is going to be extremely similar to what we already did here, because here we read the file, then we used json.parse to convert it to an actual array. I'm going to do the very same thing for our new route. So let's paste this here. And now we will be able to update this array, to add something to this array. But first we need to create the object representing the new task. Now this object, the object that represents the new task, is supposed to have three properties: ID, title, and completed. So let's try to create this new object, and maybe I'll call it new task. So as I said, the keys are going to be ID, title, and completed. Now very soon we'll think about the actual value that the ID should have, but for now let's just keep it simple at 0. What about the title? This is what we extracted from the body of the request. So the value of the title is actually just going to be title. And as you might remember, in modern JavaScript, if the key and the value are identical, we don't have to write it twice. I can shorten it and just write title. And as for the completed, the initial completed value of a new task is just going to be false. Now that I have this new object, I can add it to the array of tasks. And to do that, I can access my array, which is tasks, and push the new object to the array. And now I have the updated array. What I need to do now is update this file, tasks.json. This has to be done in 2 steps. First, we need to find the JSON representing the updated array, and then we need to write the updated JSON to this file. So let's start with finding the JSON for the array. This can be done using json.stringify. With this function, we can find the JSON of an array or an object. And in our case, we want to find the JSON of this array, the tasks array. And now that we have the new JSON, the updated JSON, we can write it to our file. And to do that, we're going to do something very similar to what we did here. So let me copy this and paste it here. But instead of writing the empty array, I want to write this JSON, the JSON that we found for the updated array. So let's move this to be the updated content of the file. And once again, we should probably return something from this route. So I'll do just what I did here. And let me copy the redirect that we did here and also use it for this route. And now we have the route that takes care of requests that are sent from this form. So let's try to use it. Let's try to add a new task, for example, eat lunch. And when I'm sending this request by submitting the form, I can see that it's immediately added to my file. If we want to make this file a bit more readable, we can do that by passing an additional parameter to stringify. So here, in addition to the array that we want to stringify, I'm also going to pass now and 2. And now I will have new lines in my JSON as well as indentation. And the size of the indentation is going to be 2 because this is what I specified here. So let's try to add another task, for example, eat dinner. And let's send this request. And we can see that now we have both of the tasks, and we can also see that the JSON now uses new lines and indentation. The problem is that all of our tasks now share the same ID. The ID of this task is 0, and also the ID of this task is 0, and so on. And this is a big problem, of course, so we want to make sure that whenever we're adding a new task, it is initialized with a unique ID, with an ID that's different from all of the IDs of the existing tasks. So up here, I'm going to write a new function, and this function will find the next ID. In other words, it will choose an ID that's not in use yet. And whenever we're adding a new task, we will use this function, and this way we will know that the new task has a unique ID, an ID that isn't in use yet. So let's call this function findNextID. Now, if we don't have any tasks yet, so if our array is empty, I'm just going to return 1. Otherwise, I want to add 1 more than the maximum values of all of the IDs that currently exist. This can be done with the following line, and basically what I did here is used math.max. And what I passed as a parameter to math.max is the IDs of the different tasks. So I used map to go over the array of tasks, and for each one extract the ID of the task. But since math.max cannot accept the array itself, it has to receive the actual values that we want to compare. This is exactly what the spread operator does, it retrieves the elements that are inside this array. Then I added 1, and this way I know that I have an ID that I didn't have before. And now that I have this function, I'm going to use it to determine the ID of the new task. So instead of just going with 0, I'm going to find the next ID. And as a parameter, we need to pass the array of tasks. So let's try to delete the file we currently have, the tasks.json file. So to do that, I use the remove command. And now it was removed. This file doesn't exist anymore. Let's restart the server. And as soon as I restarted the server, the file was reinitialized, and now it contains an empty array. So let's refresh our page, and you can see that currently we don't have any tasks yet. So let's try to add a new task, and this is going to be eat lunch. And when I'm adding this task, it's added with ID 1. Let's now add another task, eat dinner. And when I add it, I can see that it is added with ID 2. We should make one update to this route, the route that's updating existing tasks, because this route is still not aware of the file that we are now working with. When we created this route, we still had the in-memory array. We should update the code here so it will work with the array from the file. Because here, for example, we are going through the array of tasks, but this variable isn't defined yet. So I'm going to copy over this line, because this line is the one that reads the JSON file and converts it to an actual array. So let's paste it to this route. And now it should be fine. And now we are reading the array from the file when we are adding a new task, and we should also update the file after updating the task. So once again, I'm going to copy this line and paste it here. And now I can, for example, mark this task as completed, and I can immediately see the update in my file. Let's try to uncheck, and we can see that it changed back to false. So now we are able to add new tasks, and we're also able to update existing tasks. What I would like to do next is the ability to remove tasks or delete existing tasks. So let's start with the HTML. I want to add a trash bin to the right of each of the tasks. Here we are going over our tasks. We are creating the form for the checkbox for each of them, and then I want my trash bin icon. Here we go, and let's refresh our page, and we now have the trash bin icon. Once again, it's in a different line, but we will take care of it. Whenever I click on one of these trash bins, I want to send a different request. So the trash bins are actually going to be forms on their own, because whenever I click on any of them, I want to send an HTTP request to the server that will remove the task. So let's create another form for each of the tasks, and the trash bin is actually going to be a button. So for each of these forms, I'm going to create a button, and the button is simply going to contain our trash bin. So let's move the bin inside the button. And let's refresh our page, and we can now see a big fat button around each of the trash bins. I don't really want that. So I'm going to make the buttons transparent and borderless, and this way it will look like the trash bin is on its own, but it's still going to be contained in an invisible button. So let's refresh the page again, and this looks a bit better. Now, what about the action of this form? Where are we going to send the requests? So because this is dealing with the same resource, the tasks resource, I want to send it to the same URL. So once again, I'm going to just copy what we have here, tasks followed by a path parameter specifying the specific task we want to remove. And once again, the method is going to be post, because we already know that GET requests are only used to retrieve information that's on the server, but here we want to delete an existing resource, so a post request is much more appropriate. But this does raise a serious question, because now we have two different forms sending requests that are aimed at the same route. Because if I'm clicking on the checkbox, I'm going to send the request that is sent from the first form. And if I'm clicking on the trash bin, I'm going to send the request that is sent from the second form. But both of them share the same URL and method. And as a result, the same route on the server is going to handle both of them. So how can we tell them apart? How can we know if we want to update the existing task, for example, mark it as checked, or alternately, if we want to remove it? So in cases like this, what we usually do is add a hidden field. So I'm going to have this hidden field in both of the forms, and this hidden field is going to help me differentiate these two cases. If we used JavaScript, it could be simpler to solve this problem, because instead of always sending a post request, here we could probably send a put request, and here we could probably send a delete request. But this is something we cannot do when we are using an HTML form, and this is why we're going to have to use the hidden field. And the hidden field is going to imitate the different kinds of HTTP requests that could be sent if we used JavaScript. So here I'm going to add another input, and the type of this input is going to be hidden, because this is not an input field that I want the user to interact with. This is something that's built into this form, so I can easily know that this form is used to update existing tasks. As for the name of this input, I'm going to use _method. And I deliberately chose this name because it's very similar to method. And this helps me understand that while the request that is sent from this form is a post request, it's actually used as a different kind of request. And this is semantic only, because it's still going to be a normal post request, but we are going to use it for a different purpose. And this is why the name of this hidden field is method, and its value is going to be put, because this request, while being a post request, represents a put request, a request whose goal is to update an existing resource. And what about this request, the request that is sent when we are clicking on the trash bin? So let's copy this line and paste it here. And once again, the name is going to be method, because while we are sending a post request from this form, we're going to use it as if it was a different kind of request, but the value now, the value for this request is going to be delete, because we're going to use requests that are sent from this form as if they were delete requests. Now, once again, I want to submit this form as soon as the user clicks on any of the trash bins. This means that I'm not going to have here another submit button, but I want to submit my requests as soon as the user clicks on the existing button. So the way we're going to go about it, and let me close this for a second, is to do something very similar to what we did in this input. So here, we submitted our form whenever the change event was triggered. So when we detected the change event, we fired the submission of the form. So let me copy this, because we're going to do something very similar. So I'll paste it here. But this time it's not going to be the onChange event, but the onClick event. And this way, as soon as the user clicks on the button, this form will be submitted. Now, to get everything on the same line, to get the trash bins to the right of the text, I'm just going to add some styling to both of my forms, so here and here. And I want both of them to use float left, and this way everything will be on the same line. And if I refresh my page now, they are on the same line, but so is the next task. So now all of the tasks share the same line. So to solve this, I'm going to clear both for the div containing the task. So the style of this div is going to be clear both. And just to be on the safe side, let's also use clear both after we are done showing all of the tasks. So here I'll add clear both. And if I refresh the page now, it looks the way I wanted it to look. And now, back in our server, we should handle both the put requests and the delete requests. Of course, we have to keep in mind that everything is going to be handled in the same route. And this is because at the end of the day, both of these requests are post requests. But we're going to do something different for both of them. Here we're going to update an existing task, and here we're going to delete an existing task. So let's get back to our server's code. And now the requests body is going to contain more than one thing, because it used to only contain one field, which is completed. But now it might contain completed, it might also not contain it, but it might contain completed, but it is going to contain this field, the underscore method field. So let's extract the value of this field from the requests body. So here I'm going to add it to completed, and the behavior we currently have is the behavior we want in case the value of underscore method is put. And if it is, we're going to keep doing what we did before. If, on the other hand, the value of underscore method is delete, we need to remove the task from the array. Now, we already know the index of the task in the array because we already found it here. And now we can use splice. Using the splice method, we can remove an element from an array. So tasks. And now I'm going to use .splice. Now, what is the index of the element that I want to remove? Task index. So this is what I'm going to pass as the parameter, and I only want to remove one element, so the second parameter is going to be 1. And these two lines, the line that updates our JSON file, and then the line that sends the response back to the client, these two lines need to be done anyway, either if we're handling the put request or if we're handling the delete request. So let's move them here. The only other thing that I want to take into account is if underscore method is neither put nor delete. So it's something unexpected. And in this case, I would like to let the client know that the request could not be respected and the server didn't do anything with it. And now I can refresh my page and let's try to remove this task. And we can see that it was immediately removed from the database file. And also when we received the updated list of tasks, it did not contain the task that we removed. Let's now try to add a new task, say wake up. And if we add it, we can see that it was successfully added with the ID 3. And we can still mark tasks as completed or incomplete.